Today's episode is sponsored by Liberty Language Services and its new sister company, the Academy of Interpretation, that launched in early 2022. The Academy of Interpretation is an online education and learning platform for the language services industry. The AOI's mission is to expand access to educational courses while establishing a standard of quality and professionalism. They do this by bringing language service providers, content creators, and students together on an online platform that's accessible to everyone. The Academy of Interpretation was founded to address the widespread problem of untrained interpreters working in the field. The AOI offers professional, accredited courses for interpreters and serves as a platform for organizations to refer their interpreters for training. The AOI is offering Brand the Interpreter listeners a 10% discount on all courses using the discount code AOI10BTI. This code cannot be combined with any other discounts. But check out the episode show notes for more information about the Academy of Interpretation or visit their website at www.academyofinterpretation.com. Liberty Language Services is a rapidly growing language service company that recently celebrated 11 years of providing language access services, and they are currently hiring freelance interpreters for a variety of languages. To find out more about Liberty or to apply, check out the episode notes. Dawn, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Mireya. It's so lovely to be here. Really excited to be on Brand the Interpreter. I was thrilled. I was thrilled when you reached out. So this is definitely a pretty cool experience for me.
Yeah, no, and I think a much needed conversation that you and I will be having and sharing with the rest of the audience. So I'm very much looking forward to us chatting it up and bringing to light a lot of these themes that we'll be touching upon today. So before we even get started into the good stuff, though, let's chat a little bit about John a little bit more. And so let's go back in time just a little bit. Okay. And talk a little bit about where you grew up and what a fond childhood memory is of yours.
Oh, goodness, fond childhood memory. Let's see. So I grew up, I was born in Atlanta, Georgia. And then when I was a kid, we moved over to Jacksonville, Florida. Actually, a small town outside of Jacksonville. It's called Orange Park. And that's where I grew up. Fond childhood memory would really have to be soccer. I grew up playing soccer. That was the big thing. I was never meant to go to college. I was supposed to play professional soccer, which didn't happen. But but yeah, no, I grew up in North Florida, and it was really interesting because Atlanta is this enormous, even then, I mean, we're talking late 80s, enormous metropolis, really diverse. I grew up in Fulton County, and then we moved out to the suburbs of Atlanta and then moved over to Jacksonville, to Florida. I love Jacksonville, I love North Florida, but it was a lot less diverse, especially back then. We would hear someone talking Spanish and we immediately have to, my mom would have to go over and talk to them because she heard Spanish. We would never do that today. But at that time, it was really an anomaly. And I think, one of the things that really struck me, and I only realized it, let's say 20, 30 years after the fact, is we go from Atlanta. I was a native English speaker, born in the States, read and write just fine. When we moved to North Florida, to a much less diverse area of the country. And my mom didn't speak very good English. And when I went to get registered in school, I was immediately put in ESOL classes for a year. And so it coincides with a lot of what I do now. I look back now and I laugh because mostly it was just me, but I think frequently of the parents I work with on a daily basis and the students we work with. through the LSP I run, that find themselves facing this massive bureaucracy and trying to navigate it, trying to understand. Parents just want a good education for their kids, and it's intimidating. And I still have parents from several years ago that I did an interpretation for, that they managed to get my cell phone number, and they'll call me, which is obviously, I still have to take the call, and try and direct in the best way possible. But that's a memory I think of with fondness, because it kind of foreshadowed what I wound up becoming, was an interpreter. Interpreting is in my family. My sister was an interpreter. I remember my dad would talk about interpreting. I should be an interpreter one day, because it was just the anomaly of someone who has just growing up in a situation where you could fully grasp Spanish and you could fully grasp English. For my parents who came to this country, English seemed like this something that was just so alien and foreign, and they did a good job of grasping it, but they were never able to become native speakers. And so just viewing someone that grew up straddling two cultures, he was always like, yeah, you should do conference interpreting, and he would talk about it. So it's always been kind of in and around. It's definitely not what I've always done. I've only actually been an interpreter for about 5 years. But I've always read Latin American literature. I've always loved language. I've always loved the idea of being precise in my communication and understanding what's being conveyed. So in that sense, language is something that I've always been kind of fond of and intimately interested in.
Yeah. Now, do you remember if when you went into the school and started, this English as a second language program, what your thoughts were at that time? Like, did you feel like there a culture shock there? What was happening through your young mind?
Yeah, and that's the thing. When you're a child, I think you're innocent and you don't really question things. And it was completely accepted in a bigger city that I came from a family. There was so many kids just like me, came from a family where English was not the language that was spoken at home. And then we come, my mom registers me at the elementary school, and she probably wasn't able to understand the form entirely well, and probably checked, clearly correctly, English is not the primary language spoken at home. And so I'm automatically put in these ESOL classes, even though my test scores were perfectly fine and my grades and my transcripts were perfectly fine. I think that's why, in a lot of ways, clients, patients, they kind of have to be protected in that sense, because there's a level of innocence. They just more or less accept what the system kind of imposes on them. And so that's more or less. It was only in retrospect, years later, that I realized, that wasn't correct. I really didn't need to do that. I didn't need to be taken out of my classroom for a couple hours every day.
Yeah. To find out what fish was and where fish lived. And I remember those tests too. Now, John, I'm curious to know. You said that, coming from Georgia, and it wasn't something that you necessarily saw as any different. You didn't feel necessarily like a minority, or your language at least didn't, or with your parents. And you go on over to Florida, and suddenly it's like, oh, it wasn't as prevalent, perhaps, right? Or not perhaps, you're sharing that it wasn't. Did you ever encounter a moment where you felt like that seemed a bit off? Maybe your parents, or for yourself, or for your family? Like, were there experiences there where the culture differences were highlighted, perhaps?
Yeah, and I think this may be a bit sensitive, but as an immigrant, when you come to a new country, you don't bring with you the whole history of that country and the dynamics of that country. You come as an immigrant. So we came to this country more or less just wanting to find a better life. Or my parents came to this country, they had me wanting to find a better life. And there was no preconceptions about any dynamics, any history, any sort of things that go on within the societies. I know I'm speaking a little bit abstractly, but it was really only years later that I realized, when I look back at it, we never looked at things that would happen through the lens of, let's say, racism or civil rights. We were just trying to come to this country, trying to work. And so you just want to assimilate. And so if things happen, we wouldn't look at it through that lens, which is almost, in a sense, doubly sort of traumatic, because things happen and you're kind of alienated and you don't realize what it is.
Yeah.
You know, you can't put a label on it. You just think that's the way it is. And you just kind of accept it, even though it's not right, you know? So you have experiences, maybe, you know, in sports or in school, or yeah, really in other situations to where you're alienated or you're marginalized for cultural differences, language differences, maybe appearance differences, but you see them all through the lens of an immigrant, and you just, you know, you're just trying to assimilate, and so you're not able to see it as the way it is, with just, yeah, a painful history sometimes, especially in the South, of racism. Not that I ever experienced anything egregious, I didn't, but there are things that happen, you know. Marginalizing someone, alienating someone is what it is still, nonetheless, you know.
Yeah. And as you're growing up through the years, then, you know, the area in which you're growing up becomes more and more diverse.
Yeah, it really does. It really, really does. I went to school in Gainesville, University of Florida, and I was back in Jacksonville for a period of time before moving to DC. It's still, North Florida is still a small area. It's definitely a lot more diverse. Definitely with the pandemic, and there's been a huge influx. So it's really changed the composition. It's a lot more diverse. So things have definitely changed. It's been 30 years, so 30 plus years. So it's inevitable that it'll become a lot more diverse.
Yeah. Eventually you test out of your ESOL classes. And
luckily, right?
Yeah. You get reclassified, as they say, right, out of that category, and make your way into university. Like, what are you aspiring at this point? You know, what are you surrounded by that you're aspiring to do when you grew up?
Yeah, what am I, you know, I wanted to be, part of the issues is I wasn't sure. I loved reading and writing. I wound up becoming an English major. From a practical sense, the idea was go to law school. And then I did my research and became kind of disenchanted with the whole idea of being a lawyer. And it wasn't for me, the legal profession. But I wound up deciding, you know, that eventually there's really a strong inclination for entrepreneurship and what we would call kind of being an empresario, which is entrepreneur, a business person. And I've always been kind of fond of that. So I worked for a couple different companies after college, moved to DC, worked for a consulting firm, worked for a couple of consulting firms, actually helped start one. And that's kind of where I realized how difficult it is to start something. So huge congratulations, huge respect to you, Medea, for everything you've done with Brand the Interpreter in just 2 years. But I've always had, my twin loves have been reading and writing and language. And I enjoy the idea of helping to build a good organization, an organization with a mission, with a conscience that does good work. And so I worked at a consulting firm, a small one, that did good work within the space of community health centers. So federally qualified health centers. We would do a lot of systems deployments, a lot of technology consulting for them. And that's where I was kind of exposed as well to the world of health centers, community health centers, mission-driven organizations that they're kind of like the B corporations, certified B corporations, in the sense that sure, they have financial responsibilities and obviously they have to function from a financial perspective and be profitable, but their whole ideal is to be mission driven and to help deliver the outcomes that are going to drive a more equitable society. So that's where I'm exposed to FQH students. And so I wound up, and I'm kind of going off topic here, I wound up, just falling in love with the idea of mission-driven organizations.
Yeah. That plays a huge role for you in the future, right? That plays in, we're definitely going to get into that piece there. But I'm curious because every time I have these conversations, there's always something that kind of lingers, with one as we're trying to make our way in this world and trying to make connections and, what we like, what we dislike. And, as we're evolving as an individual, was language, and the topic of language access or the language industry still part of your life somehow, I imagine, particularly with the companies that you're working for?
Let's say in my 20s, my sister was running the LSP I now run in North Florida. And she was an interpreter for Language Line, going back into the early 90s, making, initially back then, $10 an hour, fielding, and she would tell me about her experiences, taking 911 calls, taking all sorts of just highly technical, complex phone calls from home, while she's raising her family in the 90s. And she was a brilliant linguist, so capable in 2 languages. And then she goes on and she starts her own LSP. And she's doing a lot of court interpreting, and then educational interpreting and healthcare interpreting. It kind of grows for her organically. But occasionally when I was home, if she was in a bind, she was sending me to an assignment. Apparently she validated me.
Help me out, brother.
This is pre-certification. This is section 1557 of the ACA. This is this is a very immature interpreting. And so she would send me to assignments, and she would brief me about, hey, you were precisely getting this message into this language and back again. You're not adding anything to this. And you just present yourself to everyone as John, the Spanish interpreters. She would say those things. And she would also say first person was always for her the most important thing. When she would go and interview interpreters, if they couldn't do first person, if they just couldn't make the mental switch of putting themselves into someone else's shoes, she would say, this is not for them. And she was very, very rigorous in that sense about ensuring she had high quality interpreters, knowing very clearly, because she was in the field every day, what it requires to do the job right. And I think that's why her LSP flourished. So for me, it was just a profound admiration for her. In the sense of someone that's willing to start something. Mind you, she had a family at the time, and grow it because she's doing good work, and just seeing how noble it is to go day to day, just doing good work, assignment by assignment. So it was always in the background, always just chatting with her. She would always keep me up to date. I would hear about, let's say, specific cases maybe she was working on. And yeah, so it was in the background, God, honestly, for about 15 years before I ever took over. And there were several judges at her funeral. Her funeral was, there was well over 100 interpreters there. So
wow.
quite a lot, yeah.
So
Yeah.
your sister passed. I'm so sorry for your
Yeah.
loss, and that you're sharing that here, and it plays a role into how this whole, dynamic of language access now you're very involved in, because the company belonged to your sister. And
Mhm.
I wanted to ask, how when you're speaking with someone and they might be speaking about something in general, but then there's this one piece of that, big picture that they glow in and they really, get very passionate about. What was that for your sister, if you recall, with all the different conversations that she would bring up about what she was doing out for the community that would really light her up? Do you remember?
I just remember so much she would that in a sense. She would tell me, she would keep me up to date. She would get so involved in these cases. And mind you, as the interpreter, she has to precisely, this is a legal situation. She has to precisely render the message back and forth. So she is, doing first person interpreting day in and day out for people that find themselves in difficult, we're talking, felony crime division at the courthouse. And I could almost see her need to vent and to kind of share this story with her, because I could see day in and day out the vicarious trauma she would go through.
Mm.
Frequently it was people there that were, just like us, in the sense that they came to this country, and she was so she would tell us. I could see it would kind of have a toll, and I think it would cause added stress for her, because she was always telling us, anonymizing it, of course, but she would tell us about the things that would happen. And yeah, that's a heavy burden for an interpreter.
Well, for sure. Yeah.
um, and it definitely was something that always kind of kept me clued into the interpreting profession, and I was just fascinated with the work of interpreters, and I could see how it was a burden she would have to carry. Um, just being there day in and day out. There's so many interpreters that just don't do that interpreting because it's so difficult. It really kind of takes a special breed of interpreter to be in the courthouse every day. Special breed of person that could deal with that. I certainly don't deal with that. But
Yeah.
yeah, no. So that's really, I could see her passion for the precision, for doing it, but still being able to stand outside it and witness, just see how difficult the situation was.
Would
And I
you
think
say that thanks to the experiences that she was able to share with you, through these conversations, that you got a glimpse of what a trained interpreter was like and should be like in their performance out in the field?
absolutely, no, I got a very, very clear sense for the level of confidence. Let's say me as an LSP owner, but I think, let's say, doctors and nurses that are forming part of the care team, when they view a healthcare interpreter, or administrators, school psychologists, teachers, when they work with an educational interpreter, or the mental health team, in a crisis situation, for the level of confidence that, let's say, a top class interpreter should give them in the situation, that they are not missing anything that's being communicated, that what they have is this human being who's a transparent conduit between them and the LEP. So I got a very, very clear sense for kind of the ideal, if you will. Not everyone's going to reach that level, but for what a top interpreter, the level of confidence they would give everyone else in the encounter.
You end up becoming the owner of her company eventually, correct? You shared with us through her passing that you become the new LSP owner, and thanks to the stories and the sharing of the encounters and experiences, you already have a glimpse of what it's like for her and I imagine as the owner of a language service provider, and then of course the encounters of interpreting, and the fact that she gave you a taste of it when she would assign you to go help out. So what were these encounters for you once you take this new role? What was the most challenging thing you would say you encountered at this new role compared to where you're coming from?
Yeah, no, and I think it's a universal challenge within the LSP world, because I spent several years, 10 plus years within consulting firms, so professional services firms, companies that are doing technology projects, strategy projects, a lot of different initiatives within large organizations, within small organizations, within mission-driven organizations, with individuals that were lawyers or business people with business backgrounds, and so I got a sense for professional services, for consulting, if you will, and I had a very clear sense for what, and a really good interpreter, for how they work and how they treat their profession, how they built up, develop themselves from a craft perspective, and I step into the LSP. I purchased it from her ears, and then I know very little about interpreting at that point, and so I started to educate myself. But the biggest universal challenge for everyone across the world of community interpreting and any level of interpreting is really, how do you ensure everyone is properly screened and properly trained, so that they can effectively interpret? How do you ensure a uniform high level of interpreting ability, so that, let's say, regardless of whether it's a common language, let's say Spanish, or a language of lesser diffusion, you have professional interpreters that can do right by the patient and the care team, or the educator team, or the mental health team, or the human services team, and precisely render kind of their role within the specific encounter. So that's always been the challenge: is how do we train interpreters? How do we screen interpreters? How do we ensure interpreters know expectations and have a uniform high level, so that across the interpreting profession, we can raise the visibility of interpreters, and start to capture a little bit more of kind of the impact we actually have. Because an interpreter community, a freelance interpreter, will go from interpreting a DNR, decision, to that has life or death implications, to interpreting an LEP maybe the next day or later in the day. I'm sorry, an IEP, which has impacts, could have impacts across decades of a person's life, to also interpreting mental health situations, or food stamp situations, which also, so these are individuals that, as community interpreters, we have a profound impact on the lives of everyone we interpret for. And so what we want is for everyone to be as trained as possible to understand what it means to work effectively as an interpreter. And I think that's what I work on day in and day out. Shadowing assignments, recruiting interpreters, screening interpreters, trying to do it at scale, so that as many people as possible have the benefits of a qualified interpreter. Because what does that do? It allows for equal access. It allows for equal access to healthcare. It allows for equal access to legal services. It allows people to do what my family was trying to do: is assimilate and just become a part of society, and live happy, productive lives. So it's so core to everything.
Yes. What was the most surprising thing of it all when you entered fully invested?
It's 24/7. Last night I was falling asleep and I got a call from Mandarin. I didn't have anyone covering. It really is 24/7. Emergencies happen when they happen. They don't happen between 9 and 5. We need interpreters around the clock.
Mm.
And so I hadn't really realized how all-encompassing it could be, in the sense that interpreters are needed at all hours, because things happen at all hours. We try and fit it in between 9 and 5, Monday through Wednesday, Monday through Friday, but it just, life doesn't work like
Didn't work out, huh?
that.
Tell us a little bit more about, the experience once you make your transition completely into this world of language access and community interpreting. At what point did it capture your heart? What aspect of it did you say, oh, I'm all in?
No, life isn't easy. I think you see situations to where just patients, LEPs, clients, they're on the margins.
Mm.
And just having a language resource that can, at the very least, give them equal access from an ability to communicate, give them, that wonderful phrase, communicative autonomy, give them that equal playing field from an ability to communicate. At the very least, they can have that equal footing to understand their options, to understand the implications of everything that's going on, to ensure nothing is being lost in translation, to be in complete control of the information that's given to them. And it's so profoundly impactful and powerful and almost humbling sometimes. Because these are life-altering situations that we encounter day in and day out as community interpreters. And so there's so many situations that just come up just from a standard nephrology visit, and you just, and someone that's going to have to, if they don't adhere to this diet, and this is this diet, not this, they're going to be on dialysis. They're still young, and they hadn't quite understood that until they had an interpreter. And so that's just example upon example of all that.
Yeah. Now, what would you say has been the biggest skill set, if you will, or maybe just the experience coming in from mission-driven organizations and that type of work into the language industry? Which one has been the most utilized of your these experiences, bringing them onto the conversations with potentially heads of maybe hospitals or school districts or things like that you apply now with the company and the language industry?
First thing I would say is I've fallen in love with kind of the people I encounter within the world of community interpreter, with the interpreters, with the patients, with the clients. It's everyone I encountered within FQHCs, fairly qualified health centers, which is wonderful, wonderful people. I think the world of professional services, one of the things it helped me learn, or it helped me to think about, the skill set kind of helped me develop, is something that's missing within the world of community interpreting, is demonstrating value. How do we talk to an administrator, a high-level administrator within a school district, to show them why they're ITB, and in ITB they go with the lowest cost vendor? How do we show them how interpreting and the quality of interpreting and the precision of interpreting can actually impact, have downstream effects in the short term, in the long term, on their students, on their administrators, on society, and directly on their own balance sheet, and when they're running a specific organization? Or how do you show to a hospital, let's call them a hospital, like a chief medical officer, at a hospital that interpreters specifically, I would say specifically, but primarily in-person interpreters will help reduce the readmission rates, will help their HCAP scores, will help quality measures, will help drive what we call, say, the triple aim, within the triple aim, which that's in healthcare, the patient experience of care. These are all measures that impact their bottom line. So one of the things I've always been really, really fascinated with and interested in is showing the value of interpreting. How does that translate to the balance sheet of a hospital or a school system, or for that matter, a law firm or court system? What are the financial implications? Not everything it translates into financial stuff, to financials, but there are things that they don't only care about the financials as well. There are things, how do we show the business case for why this makes sense to have interpreters? And not only interpreters, but qualified professional interpreters that are working towards certifications. And what does that mean for their organization?
Those measurable outcomes, right?
Yes, the measurable outcomes.
So how do we?
That's the magic question. No, that's the magic question. And so that I think there's quite a lot of research out there. There's a lot of wonderful thought leaders out there. And I think it's a whole initiative. And I think the field of interpreting is really kind of opening up or wakening up to the realization that we need to focus on, not focus exclusively, but we really need to talk amongst ourselves and really find ways to track these outcomes and demonstrate that we do have profound implications for all the organizations we work for.
You've mentioned to me that you believe that interpreting is viewed as a commodity. Expand on that a bit more, if you would, please.
Yeah. Within an interpreting encounter, let's say you have, I don't know, the interpreter, you have a patient, you have the doctor. It is really only the interpreter who knows or has a chance, the possibility to know how good they are, how precise they are. There's a lot of trust that is embedded in the interpreting profession. And unfortunately, because of that, let's say the doctors, the hospital administrators, the school system administrators, they're not able to distinguish frequently a good interpreter, a precise interpreter, a qualified interpreter from someone that's untrained.
Right.
And so we all kind of get lumped into the same bucket. And so if they can't distinguish between interpreters, why would they pay more for interpreters? So then it becomes a battle to lower their prices or lower their cost of interpreting. So then interpreting just becomes a cost center, cost burden, a regulatory burden. And they're only concerned about trying to find the cheapest interpreters because they can't distinguish between the good interpreters and the qualified, the trained interpreters, and those that aren't, because we're not measuring all these things.
We're not measuring all these things. That's going to be like the big question, right? Like, how do we measure these things? Because it's not something that is tangible per se, right? We can't, if an organization is looking to get bidders for, I don't know, let's say it's a marketing firm, potentially the firm can show up with tangible results of past client experiences and what that transfers into and looks like. It can transfer into numbers, perhaps, right? All of those things that in the interpreting profession, we can have to a point, perhaps, right? You're able to maybe bring in more customers or bring in more clients, or so the numbers might increase in that sense. But because it's connected to this more human-like feature, right? Because I feel like it's more connected. You mentioned it earlier, when your mom saw someone that spoke her language in Florida, and she was like a magnet, right? Went
Just wanted to talk to them.
just wanted to talk to them, right? Like, so there was a feeling there that is unmeasurable. And I feel like that is
comfort.
missing, right? Yes.
Yes.
How do you measure
the
comfort?
knowing. This was a couple of years ago at this point at a hospital, and what you're alluding to, it was a rare, super rare Southeast Asia language, the patient spoke, and they were ill. They were very, very ill in an ICU unit. I believe they were intubated or going to be intubated, and we're struggling to find an interpreter. And finally, we get someone, and the patient does not respond to anyone, does not respond to VRI, does not respond to OPI, is not really responding to nurses in any way for yes, no questions. Is, you can see very, very ill. And then just the simple presence of another human that spoke the same language, came from the same culture. And that was one of the most impactful moments, because there was something that went beyond words, and just knowing there's someone there, even subconsciously or very, very vaguely on a conscious level, that this person gets me. They understand what I'm trying to say. And I remember being present and just seeing the interpreter from this rare Southeast Asia language of lesser diffusion, we should say. I walk into the room, and the patient just started to communicate. Not a lot, but they weren't communicating at all before this interpreter stepped into the room. And I think, if anything, really showed me the power of interpreting to really, really drive outcomes in life or death situations. That was it.
Yeah, it's the power of language.
The power of language, yeah.
Yeah, that's powerful. That's powerful. And that's, I think, what's the difficult part is that it's having a measured feeling, right? Why they say, this is why they say that the AI would never be able to replace the human, because it's not a machine that could feel, right? And so how do you transfer feeling when a lot of it with our language is very connected to sensory, to feeling, to emotion, right?
No, and artificial intelligence, that's really oversold. There's no way. It's just impossible. It's impossible because artificial intelligence still gets back to code, to software. Software still gets back to ones or zeros. And there's things, as we all know, in life, most notably, let's call it humans, that just go beyond ones and zeros. We can't capture what it means to be human in ones and zeros. And I think what captures what it means to be human is language, and where language comes from. And I think these things are, obviously they're a mystery, and they go way beyond ones and zeros. Anyone that thinks we can reduce language, the human experience, what it means to communicate, the sense of empathy, to ones and zeros, I think it's really mistaken.
Yeah, and it's probably monolingual.
No, very true, very true.
Has not been able to make that connection to languages. I'll be convinced when I can call a big company and I'm using AI to try to communicate with a human, and I can't tell the difference, that it's like a machine. Press 1 for this, press 2 for that, and I keep pressing.
Oh, it's so frustrating. Yeah. No.
So once that gets better, then
I'm
maybe
completely comfortable saying it it's not going to happen. I don't see it happening.
Let's talk a little bit about, John, your transition into something that I feel is an amazing opportunity and just an amazing new venture for you, because, you know, you came from one world and into the LSP world, and you know, have really been invested in these last few years in the language industry, and are now making a new venture with what we see behind you, just cross-cultural communications.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about, you know, your aspirations for this new venture, and what you're hoping comes across now with you making this connection with this new company. Talk to us a little bit about how this even came to be, first and foremost.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure that one out. So I actually met Marjorie Bancroft at an ALC conference a couple of years ago, about 2.5 years ago at this point. We were riding the bus back to the airport with everyone from the conference, and we just started chatting. And there was a kind of a meeting of the minds. We were talking about, I talked about my background, just family-run LSG, North Florida. She had just relocated down to North Florida as well, and we managed to stay in touch. And earlier this year, I got a phone call, and she was looking to transition out, and things worked out. I think cross-cultural communications is an organization that's been around longer than my sister's LSP for 20 years. And CCC has, their whole mission is to professionalize the interpreting profession, which from day one has been, for me, an area where I've wanted to focus, because it's such a challenge. And I noticed immediately that we just get commoditized as interpreters. How do we differentiate ourselves? How do we show that we've invested time to recruit, screen, train, qualify interpreters, and that this can have an impact, downstream impact, huge impact? And the whole mission of CCC is, what does it mean for them to be qualified? You know, what does it actually mean for them to know what it means to be an effective interpreter? What are the skills we need? Everything. People like Marjorie Bancroft, Catherine Allen have written and put together, has been focused, and it's sold, and a number of other authors. They've sold 50,000 textbooks across the last 12 years, over 90 universities, and countless trainings, 400 plus. You're one of them, licensed TOT trainers. And so it's an organization I've fallen in love with because of the mission. Marjorie is someone who is, without a doubt, a mission-driven person. Mm-hmm. She just wants to do good work, and she's been doing it for a long time. And so just the opportunity was something I couldn't let pass by. And luckily things worked out. And the vision is to continue to do good work, to continue to write textbooks, to continue to develop trainings, to develop e-learning. Right now, one of the big things is, obviously across the last 2 years, we've seen this massive shift to remote interpreting. And so this whole history of, you have these remote interpreting OPI, VRI providers, and now it's really going mainstream to where this is primarily the mode interpreting is delivered in. And so what does that mean for the profession? And so that's something CCC has been focused on for the past 3 years. We're writing a textbook. Catherine Allen, Dieter Rouge from Boost Lingo, Caroline Remmer from Boost Lingo, Danielle Metter from Cloudbreak, Sarah Stockler from Cloudbreak, Tatiana Sestari from Cloudbreak. They've spent the last 3 years. And it's going to be 2 volumes, and it goes over the entire history of what is going on, what has happened, what is going on, what does this mean for the interpreting profession, and how do we actually effectively, at a level of what I would say is professional services, work as interpreters in a highly challenging situation, which is remote. We're supposed to be remote. So what does this all of this mean now? So that's coming out later this year. 2 volumes in the fall and in the spring. Exact timelines or dates to be determined, but they're finishing up the textbook, and so that's a large part of the focus. But the underlying focus is always quality of the interpreting profession, professionalizing the interpreting profession, training interpreters, delivering quality trainers, so that we can work as a group, as a community of interpreters, to continue to raise the standard of the interpreting profession.
Absolutely. So great. I think, mission driven, quality of interpreters. I mean, the VRI situation, I remember when we first started to navigate into uncharted waters, not that the profession hadn't already been there, right? But for many of us, that was just simply not an option, not the case, not the experience. And once we started in really being forced to find a way to deliver the quality of service via a remote setting, I think that was for me my first and foremost thought was, like, how do we deliver quality via, right, the video? Number one, for us, because it was like that meant we were going to have to learn potentially new things, right? It's not, I don't know if anyone has not figured out that it's just not simply a matter of turning on a camera and that is it. Then, I don't know where they've been this whole time. Like, there's all these different, aspects that you needed to learn. But then also, it was kind of like starting over. We had to teach everyone involved how to work with an interpreter again via a remote setting. And of course, the most difficult challenge was the technology with our LEPs, right? Them navigating, if they even had the technology to support that type of platform, how then do they navigate that technology, and whose responsibility was that? I mean, it was just like a plethora of, like just challenges. So talk about timing for this book with the different experiences, that it wasn't, we didn't need to go too far to get into and research, because I'm sure that the authors involved probably dealt with this, and we're able to bring in even that personal experience. So I know that cross-cultural for me was definitely a platform that ultimately reinvigorated my mission about professionalizing the role with bilingual individuals working in schools as interpreters, right? Because I felt like it gave them at least that the tools that they needed in order to perform this role that was very unique to, and aside from their actual roles, how to do it with confidence, because many were, so unsure on how to do this and felt very intimidated, and navigating, just the role of the interpreter within with a whole staff, team of people, right? Different people. And just really gave them those tools that they really needed to advocate for themselves, which in turn, really meant advocating for the family member, because now they're advocating for a quality of service again. And so for me, cross-cultural gave me all that, reinvigorated this passion, and I was like, I'm bringing this into the school district for sure.
Awesome. No,
and
that's wonderful.
And
that's
then
really
why?
Something.
So I know that you're, like it's just going to continue to grow, and the experiences that, you bring to the table. I had mentioned earlier in our conversation, mission driven. And I feel that because of that experience, you've been able to bring that with the LSP. It sounds like that, you've been able to carry on that torch and that responsibility, and continue to put passion. It sounds like even in our recording today, you've been able to take calls because that only happens when you're mission driven, you have a passion for that. So yes, and I'm sure that it's going to continue with cross-cultural, John, and I'm just excited for what's to come, just because of the passion, and I can see why Marjorie was so sure with regards to the
That's really sweet.
connection.
Thank
So
you.
I'd like to get
Thank you.
into now just what your vision for the future is. What is that? What are you setting your sight on? I mean, I know you have plenty right now, but
Yeah.
in the near future, what are you looking to do? What new projects are you planning?
Yeah. Well, I said a few times, I think, at the CHIA conference, is that the future is kind of in the past. And what is the past? The past is pretty straightforward. It's continued to bring together thought leaders within the community interpreting profession to help professionalize the profession, to continue to write the textbooks based on the textbooks, to continue to do the curriculum development, to develop the trainings, and then to deliver the trainings not only in person, but also online, and to deliver them obviously self-paced as well. And to stay on top of what is happening within the interpreting profession. So I mentioned obviously the remote interpreter, which is coming out later this year, but we also have something that's the educational interpreter. So what does that mean for the profession? So educational interpreting is this new area within community interpreting. I frequently do IEPs, and I know that in 60 minutes for an IEP, I feel like I've done 5 hours worth of work. It is incredibly demanding in terms of technical, not only the technical level of acumen that you need as an interpreter with your glossary, but your note-taking skills and just the variety of individuals that are in the room. So educational interpreting is kind of an overlooked area within community interpreting that hopefully is, I really think with organizations like AAITE, going to help to professionalize that aspect of community interpreting the way medical interpreting has been so professionalized. So I think that's a big focus. The remote interpreting, educational interpreting, and the community interpreting will always be at the forefront. It's so dynamic. There's always things happening within community interpreting. It's a profession that has to continually kind of be updated, so to speak, because it continues to evolve. The situations we encounter, the skill sets we need, the principles remain the same, but the nature of how we deliver those trainings and what it means to professionalize the profession, it needs to be continually updated, so to speak. So I think that's where CCC will always be. It's community interpreting and delivering the trainings, developing the content, delivering the trainings, and developing the e-learning that we need to help professionalize the profession, if you will.
For sure. What recommendations would you give to up and coming interpreters or those that are looking into potentially be a part of this amazing industry? What recommendations would you give to them if, let's say, they're looking to join an LSP? What should they be looking out for to advocate for themselves and for the profession?
No, great question. Excellent question. I think the most important thing is to try and find a mentor. If you're new to interpreting and you want to be an interpreter, it's important to find someone that can help guide you. And if we're looking at LSPs and we're looking at working at LSPs, they have to screen you. They have to screen your language skills. So I think there's quite a lot in the sense that the first thing you want to do, of course, is take a 40-hour interpreting training, interpreter training course. That's your introduction to the interpreting profession. That's the baseline. That will also educate you a little bit on language proficiency testing, and that will get you on the road to certification. So I think if someone is really interested in community interpreting, you take the 40-hour course and you do some language proficiency testing somehow. And that will get you on the road to certification. We all have to be on the road to certification. In addition to finding a mentor and looking out for the LSPs that try and underpay. We have to stick to 2-hour minimum if we're doing in-person interpreting. Don't ever work for an LSP that will try and pay you a 1 hour. I think that's the biggest red flag immediately out there. So just to summarize, get on the road to certification and make sure and know your worth as an interpreter. You have to get paid a 2 hour minimum. Pretty straightforward and simple.
And just to start, I think it's very, very important that you have those two aspects together. I feel that the experience has been that a lot of people that begin don't know where to begin and don't know what the expectation. I can tell you personally from personal experience that I was just excited that an agency was connecting with me. I didn't know that, you were just there for 15 minutes. So that's, we're going to calculate that and send you that in 45 days. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to make
I'm sorry. Yeah.
many years ago.
That's awful. Goodness.
Those are learning experiences that I had someone like John recommending a 2 hour, I've been like, no, this is not what I want to work with.
Absolutely.
John, it has been an absolute pleasure and a privilege to have this conversation with you here today, and that you were so willing to share your stories with us here on this platform. I wish you the best of luck with cross-cultural. I know that it's in great hands, and that you continue to make connections through your mission-driven work within the industry. I just want to thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mireya. No, it's been an honor to be on your show. I think you're doing wonderful, much needed work for the profession. I think we all, I alluded to this earlier, we all need to feel like we're connected to a broader community. Interpreting, it can be lonely. We're out there, we're in assignment after assignment, and we're taking on so much, if you will, vicarious trauma. So it's just the fact that someone is lending a national voice to community interpreters, to community interpreting. I love your work. I look forward to following your work. Would love to be on the show again down the road.
Absolutely. You got it. You've heard it here, guys. So I come back and you're so big now that you're like, I don't have time now.
No, impossible.
I have it recorded, John.
Impossible.
Thank you so much, John.
Thank you, Mireya.